Marc Marquez is on the verge of celebrating his 9th title, or is it his 7th? Should Marquez's 125cc and Moto2 triumphs be part of this celebration as equals to his previous 6 successes with Honda? Until now, there's been a fairly consistent answer to this within MotoGP. You will all remember in 2019, Marquez celebrating his most recent title with the magic 8 ball, referencing, the number 8, the 8th title. You will all remember, obviously, the contentious finish to 2015 and the fact that Valentino Rossi maintained and still does that he was robbed of his 10th title. But it sounds like something's might be changing it. It's kind of talk of the MotoGP world right now. Simon, can you explain in a little bit more detail?
Essentially, we're seeing a kind of a step change where more and more it seems like series promoters Dorna have made this move towards disregarding the Moto2 and Moto3, the 125 and the 250 titles. We first heard about this coming a few months ago whenever there was reports that TV broadcasters had been told to stop referring to Marc Marquez as an 8-time world champion and instead to refer to him as a 6-time MotoGP champion. We then saw the launch last time out in Misano of the new Hall of Fame, which excludes all of the Moto2 and Moto3, 125, 250, 350 world champions, much to the consternation of especially quite a few Spanish fans who have seen Spanish MotoGP legend, Grand Prix racing legend, Angel Nieto essentially written out of the history books as far as they're concerned. And then we heard coming into this weekend and Marc Marquez's first potential match point of this season that he'd been told that this would be regarded by Dorna as his 7th championship success and not his 9th, something that it seems like Marc isn't too happy about. It's been the talk of a lot of people over the course of the last week because of all these things. And really, we're no further forward to understanding what is actually going to happen should he win the championship on Sunday in Motegi, except for the fact that we know that he's kind of hinted, and his brother Alex was quite a bit stronger, that they're not very happy about the direction that we're going in.
Cards on the table here. We've encountered this question quite a lot editorially over the years, in various places. And I've always been very firm in thinking that I think 6 is more relevant than 8 here, that 7 is more relevant than 9, that, we should preface, you can count Grand Prix championships, and obviously excluding Angel Nieto from history and the whole Hall of Fame stuff seems to be handled very poorly. But at the same time, the number of MotoGP titles I have found more relevant. And for me, like, the evidence is, if I'm to bring in some riders on this, I spoke to Ayagura earlier this season. I asked him, he's a rider who delayed his MotoGP graduation a little bit. I asked him, was winning the Moto2 title more important, or was making sure you get into MotoGP right more important? And he said the MotoGP graduation was a lot more important than the Moto2 title. I remember asking Alex Marquez a few years ago whether he would exchange his Moto2 and Moto3 titles for being a MotoGP frontrunner, which he is now, by the way. And he said no, but he would exchange them for a MotoGP title, for a single MotoGP title. But, that's neither here nor there for me. The main thing is, observably in the modern MotoGP, Moto2, Moto3 reality, riders who win titles in Moto2, Moto3 don't stick around to defend them, don't stick around to win 2-3 more. They move up. They all want to get to MotoGP. MotoGP has become, like it wasn't obviously in the past, in the 500cc, 250cc era, the end-all be-all. So I understand it's not being handled well, but is it wrong in principle? Is it really? How much of it is just people being upset that Marc is going to be primarily a 7-time and not a 9-time in the record books? I know you don't necessarily agree with this, but can you try to convince me of why it should be 9, why 9 should matter more than 7?
I mean, primarily I would argue that the whole thing where Moto2 and Moto3 have been morphed into something of feeder classes for MotoGP is in itself wrong, because we have historically seen that those were classes for career riders. And it's a fairly recent innovation that there's been this push to drive riders forward out of Moto3 into Moto2 into MotoGP. As far as I'm concerned, and I've spoken about this previously, the Moto3 minimum or maximum age limit of 28 is an awful thing, because not every rider physically is built to be a MotoGP rider. And we've always had class specialists that essentially have been now banned from existing. But, we've had class specialists in Moto2 until fairly recently. We've had people like Sam Lowes and Thomas Luthi who went to MotoGP, tried it, it didn't work for whatever reason, and were able to go back to Moto2 and essentially become career Moto2 riders. Aaron Canet is well on the path right now to becoming another career Moto2 rider, and I don't see anything wrong with that. That has always been the way that our sport has been, and I'm aware, Val, that you in particular will make, and others in general will make comparisons to other sports, other forms of motorsport, where there's always been this desire to move up through, say, for example, F2, F3 in the open-wheeled car racing world. But that's not how MotoGP has been. And it just feels to me like we're losing some of the heritage of the sport, some of the history of the sport, by trying to shoehorn it into a world where F1 does it this way, so we must as well. And I don't think that's the right direction for the championship to be moving in. I don't think it's necessarily what fans want to see. I mean, if we've seen anything from social media feedback this week, it's not what fans want to see, because we're not Formula One. We are a different thing.
I must say, I am quite sympathetic to that. I think that does make a lot of sense as an argument. It's just, I mentally cannot get over the hurdle of, we have, let's take Alex Marquez as a 2-time champion, Moto3, Moto2. Let's take Johan Zarco as a 2-time champion, Moto2 and Moto2. And let's take Casey Stoner as a 2-time champion, MotoGP and MotoGP. Those are not the same thing. And I know that you will tell me that, well, not every MotoGP title is born equal, which is 100,000% true. But it's a pity that Moto2 and Moto3 have sort of lost their past status before the numbers came in. There were different numbers before then, that as things that you could not just make a career in, but that could matter more than anything in winning the title, for instance, for Angel Nieto, the way it was. But that change has happened, and I don't know that you can structure a world championship where one class doesn't hog most of the limelight. I don't really know how you fix this and how you are honest about this. And maybe, maybe it doesn't matter, and maybe there's no point in just annoying people like Mark and like a lot of the fans in making this change. But it's complicated. I don't think it's as simple as maybe some of the anger makes it out to be.
I don't think there's anyone in the world who thinks that a certain Moto2 titles or Moto3 titles are worth more than a MotoGP title. Everyone always strives to win a MotoGP title. It will always be the focus. It will always be the center of the weekend. But I don't think that necessarily has to then actively detract from the other classes. I think that's where the line is for me. You can have both. We've had both for 70 odd years, where they've been equal but different. They've been the same, but some have been more equal than others. And that's what we're starting to lose now. I think that it's possible to still keep the focus on Moto2 and Moto3. I think that it's essential to keep the focus on Moto2 and Moto3 more than we are doing, because we're in a world right now where these classes are starting to lose some of the attention in a weekend as some of the changes that Dorna, and I think it's important to stress that I believe that this is a Dorna thing and not a Liberty Media thing right now. Because of the changes that they've made, they are losing the attention. And what we're going to see, and what really worries me, and what is the most important crux of this whole argument, is that we're then going to start to lose sponsorship revenue. We're then going to start to see more and more paid riders coming in. We're going to see not the best in the world in these feeder classes. We're going to see the best supported financially. And we're also going to lose the thing where riders arrive in the Premier class as a known quantity, as something that fans can already connect and relate to. It's worth noting that Pedro Acosta has never won a MotoGP Grand Prix, yet he has a massive fan following because he's a 2-time world champion. We're building characters coming up through the ranks in a way that I think if these classes continue to get pushed to the side, and we have to treat what we're seeing here with the diminishing of their championship status as a symptom rather than the problem. But it's a symptom of a move towards a world, a reality that I think is ultimately quite harmful for the current sport and for the future of the sport.